when these safeguards would come about, which to my surprise never happened. If properly implemented, I think it would assure that REDD Plus at the minimum would not be a threat to peoples and communities, and at the maximum, that these peoples and communities would benefit immensely from REDD Plus, therefore assuring its success. In relation to safeguards, one change in the latest text is that there is now an alternative to the previously bracketed provision that the safeguards shall be monitored and reported. The option given is to ask countries to include information on how they address safeguards when they report REDD Plus activities. I prefer, of course, my text, the former, stronger formulation, but this latest formulation can also be strengthened. I was always worried anyway about using MRV of safeguards as the phrase for monitoring safeguards because I consider MRV as a quantitative exercise that assesses the attainment of a target, while safeguards are norms that must be complied with and not measured. Compliance monitoring is different from monitoring and measuring emissions. The expertise needed, the rules and protocols required for both are different, and it would be wrong to approach them in the same way. In addition, as you know, MRV is a very loaded political term in the negotiations and quite honestly resented by many developing countries as an imposition. On the two specific issues of a long-term goal for deforestation and on subnational reference levels, two sticking points in Copenhagen, the new text attempts a compromise by linking the REDD Plus activities not to a deforestation goal, but the long-term emissions reduction goal in the shared vision part of the document. In other words, there's no goal for deforestation, but it says that what we do in REDD Plus must contribute to that long-term emissions reduction goal. And by allowing as a subnational, the compromise proposed is to allow subnational reference levels as an interim measure. I personally believe these are good compromises. In Copenhagen, if we were allowed to continue, I would have pushed this myself as compromises, and they should resolve these outstanding issues. Finally, there is, of course, one big elephant in the room that still needs to be negotiated, and this is what you need to watch out for in this last week of the negotiations. Paragraph 33 of the new text has three options on how to deal with finance. It's a difficult issue because financial issues is not likely to be resolved here in Cancun. In fact, aware of the difficulties of arriving to a finance agreement, my strategy in Copenhagen when I was facilitating was to delink REDD as much as possible from the overall climate finance package. Admittedly, that is an almost impossible task, given the context of the negotiations, given the context of the UNFCCC. But I think now, looking at the three options, that a consensus is possible. But I will not share with you now my own thinking of how this can be resolved. That's like giving away a negotiating secret, isn't it? Seriously, timing is important, and we will make proposals at the right time on how to resolve these three options and find a compromise. Because you do have to find a compromise of all three. You cannot force any one of these three on the parties when these three reflects parties' positions. As a final point, I do want to say something about the issue of markets. I've listened closely to our colleagues in the negotiations who have criticized or attacked REDD because it will eventually be funded by carbon markets and therefore commodify forests, reducing its value to that of carbon. I must admit, I am sympathetic to this view, to this critique, and that certainly I believe, as I hope many of you do, that forests are not just the carbon it stores, nor the timber that can be produced from it, nor the minerals that can be extracted from it. Commodification, I think, is not equal to markets. And having markets, which even the most basic and unsophisticated of communities have, does not necessarily mean forests or carbon in forests are commodified. I think the real issue in this critique is offsets, and whether developed countries should eventually be allowed to get credit from REDD Plus activities that they support in developing countries. In my view, all of this debate on markets and offsets is speculative. The truth is that the preparedness and pilot phases will be for a while, and the results-based phase will not be for another maybe 10, even 15 years. I really believe we have the time to craft the rules properly for that phase. And this is precisely why we have a phase approach, another idea agreed on in Copenhagen that's still in the current text. To end, I repeat what I said in the beginning. REDD Plus, as it has developed, is now designed to achieve climate, human rights development, broader environmental and governance objectives. I think then, as such, it is an idea that deserves to be tested, and I agree with the theme of Forest Day 4, it is time to act es moment de actuar. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm very pleased and very thankful that CIFOR invited us to participate in this wonderful and unique and perhaps course-changing of history event. How many of you here are parties to the negotiations? Can you please raise your hand? Okay, I'm happy to see some of you here because otherwise it would be like praying to the converters, okay? There's a lot of talent in this room, and obviously the Forestry-wise advice is not gonna come from me, but from all of your colleagues that are here. But it's very important because otherwise it's like preaching to the converters, as I said. Red, the color, is a signal, a warning signal that could, according to the Chinese and to many cultures, could mean crisis. But let's not forget that crisis is a combination of danger as well as an opportunities. And let's not lose the opportunity that this crisis or this kind of paralysis in the negotiations could mean for REDD plus for the forest that you're fighting for. The time to act, and as President Calderon, act today, act now, and to move from red to green. And green, it's REDD plus. Now, let me reflect with you that everybody, in all the meetings that I've been participating as an observer, are asking for a signal. Everybody wants a signal. Why not move ourselves forward as ourselves? That would be a powerful signal. REDD plus can send the right signal that at Cancun, at least on some issues like this, a balanced, feasible, equitable, just agreement can be reached. Some of you may also be wondering, what's a guy from the Ministry of Finance doing in a forestry event? Well, I asked myself that question a couple of years ago, but let me tell you that it also has to do with a signal. The signal is that Ministries of Finance are learning around the world and understanding that climate change, in this case, forestry issues, have many aspects, and three of them have to do, yes, the environmental, the social, the human rights, the indigenous, the legal, but also have economic, fiscal, and economic aspects. So we're trying to send a positive signal that we're with you, and we want to understand and learn from you to make a team and make this happen. I was asked to share with you some specific REDD experiences from Mexico as the host country of this COP16. I think we had a wonderful lecture by the Minister of the Environment, by the CONAFOR director, as well as from my president. So it would be hard for me to top them, but I would like to share some ideas on this initiative that we have from our modest perspective. Mexican forest and agrarian policies, along with economic factors such as mitigations, have served greatly to reduce deforestation and temperate forests, as the president said. The problem of deforestation is now heavily concentrated in humid tropical forests and on dry tropical forests. For humid tropical forests, the Plan Piloto, especially, in fact, by a matter of fact, on this state of Quintana Roo, that has operated from '82 to 2004, was a very innovative bilateral program that was sponsored by GTZ from Germany that served Mexico to establish community forest management for timber in the state and stop heavily deforestation. The problem of dry tropical forests is more difficult, as most of you might know, since they have few commercial species. The most successful experience in restoration of dry tropical forests is also very nearby here, Quintana Roo, in the state of Chiapas, and Guerrero, with indigenous communities. What future role, there was another question asked, what would be the future role that we see government of Mexico playing to support implementation of a national REDD Plus strategy? I'm seriously convinced that our role, and the role of all the governments in the world, it's crucial and determinant in this. Mexican the government policy has been key in developing the community forest sector in Mexico. Were devolved the rights to forests as part of the agrarian reform that President Calderon was talking about, and to consolidate community rights over the forest, with timber being obviously one of the most important rights, with the reform of Article 27 of our Mexican Constitution in the year of 1992, as also the head of the Mexican government said. I also think the REDD Plus offers a great opportunity for countries like Mexico for a couple of reasons. First, and these are not exclusive, but these are some of the ones that we identified from our modest and perhaps sometimes myopic perspective, but we're trying to learn from this. First, to earn carbon credits from activities that reduce deforestation and forest degradation, as well as actions that enhance carbon sinks and remove carbon from the atmosphere. Second, to enjoy multiple environmental and social co-benefits from protection of the biodiversity, watershed protection, and from non-timber forest products. And third, benefit the forest community, prioritizing on those regions when there's indigenous population. Now, for REDD Plus to be beneficial to Mexico, we believe that it must comply with a couple of issues. First, be effective in reducing emissions and resulting in carbon credits and continued flow of investment funds into the country or into your countries. B, be efficient in the sense of achieving emissions reductions at least cost. C, minimize undesirable social and environmental trade-offs. D, ensure the generation of environmental and social benefits. Number 5, result in a fair and equitable distribution and sharing of overall benefits. And lastly, among many other things, attract significant levels of investments from abroad. And one other one could be also to generally promote sustainable development. Mexico REDD strategy would be or should be to incorporate the REDD program into our own existing government programs like the one that CONAFOR that some was talk about that. As to communities and private forest owners, they will be able to participate in the REDD Plus on a voluntary basis by signing a contract with CONAFOR, which was a forestry energy entity represented by Dr. Rojo, to undertake certain specific activities in exchange for payments that will be set at a level that can compete with alternative uses after the project costs are covered. CONAFOR has been operating these projects for a while that have generated value and great experience, in fact, great experience that we think could be exported or shared with some other countries, such as the Community Forestry program. The other program is payment for hydrological services program, and the payments for carbon sequestration program. These are among the principal programs. Now, the Mexican government, and we should participate also there and help you, must first and foremost establish, obviously, a national baseline and a national accounting system for carbon emissions and for carbon sequestration. This would not only make it possible for existing and new government programs to benefit from REDD Plus payments, but it can also help make existing community forest and payment for environmental services programs comply with international REDD Plus requirements. The government will translate the international requirements into national requirements, that's what we're seeing, and ensure that existing community programs meet them. The government will then be receiving international payments based on national reduction of emissions and enhancement of stocks over and above the established baseline. Yeah. Okay. Now, let me tell you that we can go into more detail afterwards. I think that all the things that you are doing, many other institutions are doing, it's wonderful. But let me leave you a last thought. As long as there's not a carbon price in the world, most of the things we're doing seem to be sometimes frustratingly as a hobby. That would be the one thing that could really change the behavior. That could be the really thing that could push these initiatives to their full potential. That could be the thing that could come out also of this meeting in Cancun. Even if it's symbolic, that would be a major shift in the negotiators. I have to finish. I've been run with the red card, but I would be more than happy to share some other ideas later on. Thank you very much for your patience.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So maybe I need someone to help me to show the slides. So it's my pleasure to have a chance to give you a brief introduction about China's action in forestry to addressing the climate change. So please. So Chinese government has attached great importance to forestry development to give profound attention to forestry in improving ecosystem, combating climate change, improving livelihood, and boosting rural economic development so as to promote forestry sustainable development. In the last decade, the government has allocated more than 70 billion US dollar of investment to afforestation and reforestation, protect natural forests, and promote sustainable forest management. The carbon emission from forests has been reduced through rational control harvest, reduction of deforestation and forest degradation, and control the combating of forest fire, disease, and insect pests. Next, please. From 1998 to year 2009, planting area in China has totally more than 65 million hectares, with annual planting more than 5 million hectares. Annual forestry investment rose from $2 billion US in 1998 to $21 billion US in the year 2009. So, according to the 7th National Forest Inventory, by the end of year 2008, the forest areas reached 195 million hectares. The forest coverage reached to 20%, and the stock volume reached 13.72 billion cubic meters. And the net increment of forest areas was 365,000 hectares and 20 million cubic meters in volume in the last 10 years. So next, please. According to the Forest Resource Assessment by FAO in 2010, the forest areas expanded the fastest in China during the year 2005 to 2010. So next, please. So the efforts for China addressing the climate change through forestry. So Chinese governments highlights the forest's unique role for mitigating climate change. It proposed to strive to increase forest resources and forest coverage by 10 million hectares and the forest stock volume by 1.3 billion cubic meters by 2020 from the year 2005 levels to sequestrate carbon. Next slide, please. So the main efforts for China has taken, one is formulated the Forestry Action Plan to address climate change under the direction of National Plan to address climate change. So it would help to improve existing forest quality, strengthen to protect the soil of wetlands and forests, intensify exploitation of bioenergy relevant to forests, strengthening prevention of forest fire and illegal occupation of forest lands, control plant diseases and insect pests, increase wood utilization rate, extend wood use through forest sustainable management. And second action is to establish forestry carbon trade platform for voluntary emission reduction. The government is supposed to set up Chinese Green Carbon Foundation, aiming at encourage enterprises and public to reduce emission voluntarily through donation to afforestation. So the main experience for China forestry development, first is for the administration. Chinese forestry sector totally in charge of protection and construction of ecosystem, including construction and the protection of forest ecosystem. Management and restoration of wetland ecosystem improve. Okay, so can you fastly move the slides? And the second, for the content of development, forestation and reforestation and conservation and sustainable forest management are given equal attention and implemented simultaneously. For the objective, strive to realize the multiple benefits of forests to meet the diverse social requirements, including the benefits of environmental, economical, and social, as well as carbon sequestration. For the measurements, China implements national key forestry programs primarily, supplemented by nation compulsory tree planting. For the finance, all these efforts mainly rely on government finance, meanwhile improving the policy environment for enabling and encouraging social capital inputs. To the REDD Plus mechanism, in the recent 10 years, China actively explored the financial mechanism with main investment from public financial input for reduce the deforestation and degradation. Such effort includes the Natural Forest Protection Program and also built the Central Compensation Fund for payment of environmental service. So, although China has got achievement in increasing forest, improving livelihood of forests, of people relying forests, and also few the problems and challenges. First is the aggregate forest resources are not adequate, and especially of the forest areas per capita is far below the world average. The second is forest quality is poor and management workload is very heavy. The third is the forestation and the forest management is increasingly difficult. Fourthly, China still endures the enormous pressure of poverty alleviation and increasing timber supply. The fifth, there exist barriers on institution and the mechanism of forest management. So for the perspective to REDD+ in post-Kyoto era, first, the international community should pay a great attention to forest significant function on mitigate and adapting to climate change. A second, equal importance should be attached to reducing emission from deforestation and forest degradation, as well as maintaining the enhanced forest, the carbon stocks. The third one is China's contribution through the faster and large-scale forestation, increasing forest resource and forest conservation to addressing the global climate change should be recognized. And finally, assist to establish national technical support system. In addition, China needs to collaborate with the support by international community and on technology and capacity building. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to raise this a little bit. Thanks for the kind introduction. I've been asked to provide a perspective from a multilateral initiative that is working in the area of REDD+. And I am with the UN REDD program. The UN REDD program is one of two multilateral initiatives that is providing support to capacity building for national REDD+ strategy preparation. And we do this work within the context of national economic development and policies. And this is an important point, and it's a theme, I think, that we've been hearing this morning, and as well as some of the earlier interventions. And I will come back to this theme again in a few minutes. The program is a partnership between FAO, UNEP, and UNDP. And we are currently funded by Norway, Denmark, and we have funds that were pledged from Spain. And we work in partnerships given the multifaceted nature of the REDD+ agenda. Where are we working geographically? We work principally in three regions: in Latin America, in Africa, as well as in Asia Pacific. We currently have 29 partner countries, and of those 29 countries, 12 are currently receiving financial support from the program, and those are shown in the red on the map that you can see on the screen. And the other countries in blue participate in the program, but not yet receiving any financial support. How do we work with these countries? Our strategy in supporting these countries is highlighted in our 5-year strategy, which was approved by our policy board in November. And the strategy identifies 6 key thrusts. The first one is MRV and monitoring. The second one is supporting national REDD+ governance. Again, this is a theme that we've been hearing from the president earlier this morning, as well as the keynote by Tony. And it is also one of the learning events that you will participate in later today. Stakeholder engagement is another thrust that we work in, and again, this is a very important area. It's something that was highlighted again from the perspective of indigenous people, and that this is very important. And we see stakeholder engagement not as a once-off activity, but it is a continuous process, and it has to be meaningful. The issue of multiple benefits is something that came up again in terms of the issues of biodiversity, in terms of sustainable forest management, ecosystem services, and so on. So again, an area that is very important and an area that has come up again in the discussions today. Equitable benefit sharing, again, this thing comes up. If we're talking about REDD Plus finance and if we're talking about performance-based payments, how are these benefits going to be distributed at the national level? Who are all the players along the value chain of REDD Plus? And how do we design a scheme that ensures that these benefits are equitably shared? And then, of course, REDD is about sector transformation. How do we change how forests are valued and used and managed and so on, and how do we move to a low carbon based economy? So these six thrusts, they enable the program to have a longer term relevance within the REDD Plus cycle. They also enable us to provide in-depth and strategic support to the countries that we are working with. And of course, they enable us to work at the national level, as well as at the global level, looking at some of the normative work and developing approaches and methods. In terms of funding, I know this is something of interest, and we are talking about REDD Plus finance here. The current net contributions, commitments to the UN REDD program are 92 million. Of this 92 million, 77 million has been approved by the policy board. So the policy board is our governance structure for the program, and these requests for funding from the countries are put before the policy board for review and for approval. And of this $77 million that has been approved by the policy board, roughly to 52 million is designated for country-level activities. So this is, we're supporting the countries directly. And of the 77 million that has been approved by the policy board, 47 million has been dispersed by the Multi-Donor Trust Fund, which manages these funds for us. I mentioned in the first slide the issue of partnerships. These are very important, and I just want to focus here on partnerships that we have with the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, FCPF, and the Forest Investment Program, FIP. These are World Bank hosted initiatives. We have been getting very strong signals and messages from the countries, from the donors, that we need to work closely together. And so I want to focus on this issue of a joint delivery platform that we've been working and developing. And the rationale behind this joint delivery platform is, first of all, we want to avoid a fragmented implementation at the national level. We want to work with the country. We want the countries to have ownership and to provide the leadership for REDD Plus strategies. And secondly, we want to improve efficiency and effectiveness of how we work at the national level and how support is provided to the countries. So just quickly, some of the progress that we've made so far. We have come up with a common template that guides the preparation of these readiness plans in the phase 1 of REDD Plus. And this simplifies. It means that a country doesn't have to use a UN REDD template and an FCPF template or a FIP template. There's a single template. We also have been working on common guidance on stakeholder engagement. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we take this issue of stakeholder engagement very seriously. It is an issue that the different stakeholders take very seriously, and so we are responding to those signals that we are getting. We undertake joint missions to the countries, again, to ensure that we have efficiency and effectiveness. And then most recently, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility has started to look at this whole idea of multiple delivery partners. Previously, the delivery partner for the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility has been the World Bank, and they're now beginning to look at how can we work with other delivery partners. They have identified 5 pilot countries, and 3 of those pilot countries have opted to work with UNDP. These are issues that are still under negotiation and discussion, but that is interesting that the UNDP, as I mentioned at the beginning, is one of the partners of the UN REDD program. Now, turning to the issue of this particular session, I just want to make a few comments about the opportunities and challenges in terms of REDD Plus finance and how it can also support development. And I think that the first opportunity and challenge is how to ensure country ownership and leadership. And if we were looking for evidence, we heard it today. We heard the President of Mexico stand here and speak passionately about the commitment of Mexico towards this issue of REDD Plus. So political commitment is there, it exists. And I think that what we have to do is to ensure that we nurture that and we ensure that this commitment grows and continues. And we have to work within the context of national economic development and the policies. And if we want REDD Plus to contribute to development as well as to reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, we have to look at it as a package, as part of what is happening at the national level. We need to have meaningful engagement of the different actors and institutions if we are going to bring about this transformation in these policies that we are referring to. So that is very important. We know that when we are going to implement REDD Plus, the issues of biodiversity, ecosystem services are likely to benefit because reducing deforestation will benefit biodiversity, will benefit ecosystem services. But there is no guarantee that the social impacts of REDD will be positive. So one of the challenges, how do we minimize the social impacts of REDD Plus? This is very important. So we need to ensure the issue of equitable benefits distribution. We need to secure tenure and access rights to forest resources. And these are going to be things that are going to be discussed this afternoon in some of the learning events. So there will be an opportunity for you to go deeper into this issue. Two more points. The issue of engagement of the private sector. We've been working in phase one of REDD Plus. We haven't really been engaging with the private sector, but we know that the private sector is a key stakeholder out there. They have an interest, and ultimately, when we move to the area of performance-based payments, they might become an important player. And we know that there are debates that Tony referred to, the debate around markets and fund-based mechanisms. But these are issues that we will have to deal with. And then finally, another point that is a challenge and an opportunity is this whole issue of what should REDD Plus be focusing on. Should it be focusing on carbon and the concerns that a single focus on carbon in itself does not recognize the broader values of the forest. And that if we are focusing only on carbon, then the policies that emerge from the focus on carbon ignore the social dimensions and the policies that we need to have in place to address those issues. So I stop there, and thank you very much.
I'm very appreciative to be here, even though Bede had quite an accident from Maryland, Torres tendon. But I'm very happy to stand in. And thanks, CIFOR, for the opportunity to speak from the private sector perspective and the recognition of the role of private sector in the involvement of REDD. Terra, with its partners, government partners, NGO partners, and private sector partners, has been working at both the project, the subnational, and the national level to develop REDD assets that both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also improve livelihoods. I guess I'm here to talk about the elephant in the room, AKA the markets. So without further ado, I'll talk about that elephant. But without markets, it's very hard to catalyze private investment. So they go hand in hand to a large extent. So when we speak about markets, we can evaluate, let me see if I can get this guy to go. There we go. We evaluate both the demand and supply side. A few comments on the demand side. Clearly, the estimates of how much money is needed to reduce emissions are quite high. And while we have amazing donor pledges, even if all of those are met under the Copenhagen Accord and some of the new ones since then, there's still a sizable funding gap that it's necessary to fill to reduce deforestation to meaningful levels. So where will private sector investment come from? That can come from regulated entities or soon-to-be regulated entities of countries that will need offsets to meet their compliance obligations. comes from financial investors, institutional investors, trading houses, funds, wealth managers that manage high net worth individuals' assets. And those financial investors are motivated to make a return. It'll also come from corporate social responsibility buyers, both the corporate side as well as the consumer side. We hear more and more about consumer-driven products that are greenhouse gas neutral. And there are early investments being made. There's investments of in-kind technical work that's being done to develop and monetize carbon assets. We see some upfront investments through emissions reduction purchase agreements, or ERPAs, that are being done, equity structured investments to develop REDD+ projects. And there are investments, but the size is still small. And in all the discussions we have with potential investors in REDD, it's poised for growth. But we'll need to see the things that are necessary later in my discussion here to see how we'll catalyze that. You also have to look at the supply. The supply side has been building for the last 4 years with a lot of hard work from people in this room. There's hundreds of well-designed REDD projects out there. There's also subnational jurisdictions as well as national that are starting to operationalize REDD programs, which will also generate REDD emission reductions. We have standards that are finally starting to mature that can be used to inform and help guide the development of compliance markets. We have the Voluntary Carbon Standard, who just approved 3 REDD methodologies, a couple of which were done this week. 5 more are under assessment, and the Voluntary Carbon Standard is ready to issue some of their first credits probably in the first quarter next year. We have what's called the CCB, the Climate Community Biodiversity Standard, that is set to help with and ensure social and environmental benefits beyond carbon. And then the National REDD+ Social Environmental Standards that's looking at being voluntarily adopted by national governments or jurisdictions that can make sure that national or jurisdictional level REDD+ programs meet social and environmental goals. So we also see something interesting, a stronger capacity with sellers or project proponents to engage with the private sector. The two have rarely met, and that capacity is getting better. So what are the things necessary to catalyze private investment, and nice sustainable private investment? It wouldn't be good to have private investment for 2 years and then have it go away. So of course I'd like to say that certainly a binding unilateral agreement here in Cancun would be one thing. But I think the private sector is realistic. What are we going to need to create a robust investment environment? We need regulatory signals, and we're starting to get those. And that starts with developed countries and the commitment to use REDD as an accepted mitigation instrument. We need bilateral, multilateral, unilateral. It actually doesn't matter too much. It doesn't have to be unilateral. If it's bilateral, there is some risk that it could be too fragmented and very difficult for investors to try to navigate. And we are seeing signals, as I said. I'm from the state of California. Oh, I'm not turning my slides there. Thank you, Stephen. There we go. Thanks. So I'm from the state of California. California has just included REDD as a sectoral crediting offset option. It'll be likely the first REDD compliance market out there. We also need to see pathway from project-based accounting, which we're doing today, to the jurisdictional accounting level through nested approaches. We need to make sure that that includes the MRV necessary to do that. Nested approaches, which are basically the ability to account for spatially explicit or project actions in the context of jurisdictional accounting. That'll allow us as investors to assess the risk and return of investment. It will also ensure rights holders' protections as both the economic value and control of carbon assets is devolved to those rights holders. And we can see the voluntary market could play a role in setting standards and helping to pilot these. It's not easy to develop nested approaches, and so the voluntary market is a great place to start, to learn, and to pilot the activities. So we also have to create appropriate host country REDD designs that'll catalyze investment. They clearly need to be government-led initiatives that meet development goals as well as land use plans in each of the countries. They also need to meet the compliance countries' REDD requirements, but they have to be adapted for host country conditions. We also see those designs need to have reserve accounts set up and funded to meet non-performance as well as permanence. The processes under host country designs should be predictable and transparent so that it's clearly understood how to engage, what are the risks of engaging, how do I track my progress in engaging. And then also very, very important is ensuring that the design on the host country side, as you've heard from a number of our panelists, takes care of stakeholders, rights holders, governance, and safeguards. And that's actually something that's important to investors as well. It's not just because it's the right thing to do, it lowers risk for investors. So investors are quite motivated to make sure that REDD design includes those kinds of safeguards. Oops. I'm not having a whole lot of luck trying to multitask here. I thought I was a pretty good multitasker. So the last one here is the role of market-based funding and the role of non-market-based funding. And it's actually going to be quite critical when we look at programs like UN REDD and other programs that are out there. How do we integrate and how do we create a hybrid system that will catalyze the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through REDD? And so we have all these different financial vehicles. The role of markets, generally markets work most efficiently when you have the ability to create a direct link between the action and the production of a good or service, i.e. there has to be a direct cause and effect, otherwise it's very difficult to assess risk. Without markets, it's going to be hard to catalyze private investment. Appropriate for some of these, markets are appropriate for some activities that reduce deforestation, but also when we look at markets, there's a risk. It's been cited here, it was cited earlier this morning. Profit motivation can create risks for countries, for indigenous people, for developers, and what we need to make sure is that in the design of market-based funding that all of those safeguards are in place and that those that are applying their private investment dollars do so in a way that their investment criteria incorporates those. Some of my thoughts on non-market-based funding, and some of these are actually quasi-market-based funding, but certainly traditional donor structures and the funding that comes from that is really, really important to build institutional capacity in host countries. And that's a big, broad term, institutional capacity. It's MRV, it's tracking systems, it's the resources necessary to manage a REDD program. Traditional donor funds are good for governance support, and also for the government policies and programs where it's difficult to make a direct connection between the activity and the number of reduced tons from deforestation. Donor funded, yeah, I've got 2 points in my 1 minute. Donor funded payments that are based on greenhouse gas emissions, payment for performance systems, as we call them. Some of the donors are evolving to this level. If they're measured in a way where we have verified early actions, markets can use those to develop. And other guarantees that are quite important for non-market-based funding: country risk insurance, regulatory risk floors, first loss, subsidized debt. These are all things that can be provided from the donor community, from banks, that are not necessarily market funded, but they can catalyze investment. So with that, thank you.